Have you ever imagined waking up to find your whole life rewritten, with no warning, no choice, and no escape? What if you went from being invisible to royalty overnight, but the crown came with chains? You're not just watching a love story tonight. You're stepping into a trap so twisted, even your heart won't know which way to run. And yes, by the end of this video, you're going to finally get the answer to that burning question you clicked on this video for. Why did a billionaire prince force her into marriage? And why can't she stop falling for him? So lean in, because I'm about to take you deep into a world where power and passion collide, where secrets rule behind silk curtains and diamond walls, and where love may not feel like love at all. But here's the truth. Everything you think you know about romance is about to be turned upside down. Stay with me, because once this begins, you won't be able to look away. And trust me, if you leave, you'll regret not knowing what really happened in the palace that night. It all started on a rainy Wednesday, just another ordinary day in a life that felt completely forgettable. Elena Hart was a girl who kept to herself. Quiet, grounded, hardworking. Her dreams were simple: pay the rent, avoid her emotionally distant stepfather, and maybe one day become a published illustrator. Nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed romance heroine. But life doesn't wait for you to be ready, does it? It just shows up unannounced, and sometimes wearing a crown. The day she was taken from her world, it wasn't with a warning. It wasn't even with kindness. It was with a black car, for guards in suits, and a sealed envelope with royal insignia. No return address. No goodbye. You ever feel like you're being watched? Like your life doesn't really belong to you? That's how Elena felt the second she stepped into that car. And the crazy part? A piece of her didn't resist. Because deep down, no matter how much we hate the unknown, there's something irresistible about being chosen, especially when you spent your whole life being overlooked. But what she didn't realize, what none of us could have known, is that she wasn't being chosen. She was being claimed. And there's a dark difference. Now imagine this. You arrive at a palace so massive it makes skyscrapers blush. Guards flank every hallway, and everyone speaks in hushed tones like they're afraid the wolves themselves might listen. Elena was thrown into this world without explanation. And then he appeared, Crown Prince Kale of Alizia. Tall, sharp-jawed, ice-eyed, with a voice like silk soaked in steel. A man who ruled rooms without saying a word. And when he finally did speak to her, his first words weren't hello. They were, "You are now my wife." Let that sink in. No proposal. No romance. No choice. Just a cold declaration that hit her like a slap. Her stunned silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. Because in the presence of Kale, silence was the safest answer. He wasn't cruel. That's what made it worse. He was calculated. Always watching, always 5 moves ahead. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to control a room. He was the room. But why her? Why a girl with no title, no royal blood, no connection to anything beyond the city she grew up in? That's a mystery, right? That's a thread that'll unravel everything. And I promise, before this video ends, you'll understand exactly why Prince Kale, billionaire, royal, emotionally locked like a vault, forced Elena into a marriage she didn't agree to, and why it may have saved her life. Now let me talk directly to you, the person sitting there, maybe half-scrolling, maybe debating if you should keep watching. I know stories like this sound like fantasy, like the kind of thing only found in romance novels with dramatic covers and castle backdrops. But this one, it's different. This story is built on secrets, on betrayal, on the kinds of decisions that keep you up at night. And if you've ever felt powerless, if you've ever loved someone who didn't deserve it, or worse, someone who did but couldn't show it, then this isn't just a story. It's a mirror. You might see yourself in Elena, or you might see who you could have become if your life had taken a turn toward danger. So don't go anywhere, because what's coming next? It's where things really start to twist. Let's talk about the royal contract. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a political weapon, signed in ink that might as well have been blood. Kale's country was on the edge of collapse, rumors of coups, blackmail, betrayal within his own family. The only way to save the throne was to marry someone untouchable, someone not tangled in the web of royal corruption, someone invisible. Elena, she didn't know it yet, but she was a pawn in a much deadlier game. And Kale? He was a king in waiting, trying not to fall in love with the one person he was supposed to keep at arm's length. Oh, yes, that's right. For all his ice and indifference, Cale had a secret too. He wasn't immune to her. Not her fire, not her fury, not the way she challenged him in private when the cameras were off and the walls echoed with their silent wars. This wasn't a love story. It was a battlefield. And their hearts, just collateral. I want you to think for a moment. What would you do if you were Elena? Taken from everything familiar, forced into silk dresses and ceremonial crowns, instructed on how to smile but never how to feel, surrounded by people who looked at you like you didn't belong. And the only person who could protect you was also the one who trapped you. You'd hate him, right? But what if, just maybe, the more you hated him, the more you started to understand him? Here's where it gets even darker. Elena finds something in the palace, something she was never supposed to see. A letter hidden behind a false wall in the east wing. It was addressed to Cale, but written by a woman who vanished 5 years ago. A woman whose name has been scrubbed from every royal document. The letter's last line, "If you go through with the marriage, everything we fought for will burn." That's where we leave off for now, because from this point forward, nothing is what it seems. Elena isn't just a pawn. Cale isn't just a prince. And this marriage? It's a trap for both of them. So if you want to know what's in that letter, who the missing woman was, and why Elena might be the only one who can stop the entire royal empire from collapsing, you need to keep watching. The answer to why she was forced into this marriage is far more chilling than you ever imagined. And the moment you think you've figured it all out, that's when everything flips. Hold tight. You're not just watching a love story. Elena isn't just a pawn. Cale isn't just a prince. And this marriage? It's a trap for both of them. So if you want to know what's in that letter, who the missing woman was, and why Elena might be the only one who can stop the entire royal empire from collapsing, you need to keep watching. The answer to why she was forced into this marriage is far more chilling than you ever imagined. And the moment you think you've figured it all out, that's when everything flips. Hold tight. You're not just watching a love story. You're stepping into a royal lie before the letter, before the palace, before the crown she never asked for. Elena Hart lived in a quiet corner of the city, one of those worn-down neighborhoods where people kept their heads low and their dreams even lower. She shared a cramped apartment with her stepfather, Roger, a grizzled former security guard who hadn't smiled in years and rarely spoke unless he needed to demand something. Her mother had passed when Elena was just 16, and the woman's absence still hung in the air like a ghost that never left. Roger wasn't cruel, not in the way fairy tales describe villains. But there was an edge to him, like he was always waiting for something to go wrong so he could say, "See? Told you so." Elena learned early to walk lightly around him, to keep her sketchbooks hidden under the mattress, and to stash every extra dollar she owned in the lining of an old boot in the back of her closet. She trusted no one with her dreams. Not because she didn't want to, but because no one had ever proven themselves worthy of hearing them. For the last year, she'd been working at a small publishing warehouse, folding marketing kits and packing book pre-orders for authors she envied quietly. Her days were monotonous, but they were safe. Her co-workers mostly ignored her, except for one, Devon, a graphic designer with soft eyes and a crooked smile who brought her coffee in the mornings and asked questions about her sketches. He was the only person in her orbit who made her laugh, and he seemed genuinely interested in her, not just as a co-worker but maybe something more. But just when things began to shift between them, just when Elena allowed herself to feel like maybe someone finally saw her, he vanished. No warning, no goodbye. One Friday he was helping her staple envelopes. By Monday, his desk was cleared. Management claimed he resigned, but something about it felt off, especially when she found a strange key taped to the bottom of her coffee mug the next day. No note, no explanation, just a black iron key so old it felt out of place in their modern office. She didn't tell anyone about it, not even Roger. But in the days that followed, she started noticing the car. It wasn't always the same model. Sometimes it was a sleek black sedan, other times a matte gray SUV with tinted windows. But it always parked across the street from her apartment and never stayed longer than 20 minutes. Just long enough to be noticed, just long enough to make her uneasy. At first, she tried convincing herself it was coincidence, but when she saw the same car outside the laundromat and again outside the bookstore on her break, her stomach began to twist. Then, The envelope arrived. Thick, cream-colored paper. No stamp. Just her name in flawless calligraphy. Inside was a formal summons to the Royal Court of Alizia, addressed to Lady Elena Hart of the City of Providence. There was no sender's name, but at the bottom was a wax seal with a symbol she didn't recognize until much later, a lion wrapped around a rose, bleeding from its thorns. She had no royal lineage, no noble blood. She didn't even have a passport. The morning they came for her, Roger was already gone. No note, no trace, just his ashtray sitting in the center of the kitchen table, still warm. The guards didn't speak English. They simply motioned for her to follow. And for reasons she still couldn't explain, she did. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was because some part of her had been waiting her whole life for something extraordinary to happen. But that decision, getting into that car, would haunt her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Now inside the palace walls, Elena began to piece together a web so intricate, even the truth seemed like a lie. She wasn't just marrying a prince. She was stepping into the center of a dynasty crumbling from within. There were whispers of an uprising, murmurs that someone inside the palace was orchestrating sabotage against the crown. Prince Kale, despite his cold exterior, seemed almost paranoid. Meetings held behind closed doors, rooms locked at all hours. And more disturbingly, Elena noticed she wasn't the only one being watched. Late at night, she'd catch glimpses of shadows slipping across her windows, feel the soft click of a phone being hung up just as she entered a room. She tried confronting Kale once, demanded answers, but he only looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and said, "The less you know, the longer you'll live." Then he turned away. But there was someone else in the palace, someone unexpected, a woman named Serafina, elegant, poised, with a kind of beauty that felt dangerous. She claimed to be the palace's cultural advisor, but her knowledge of Elena's life in Providence was unsettlingly specific. She mentioned Elena's childhood dog by name, quoted something Elena's mother had once written in her journal, a journal Elena had buried with her. Serafina smiled often, but never with warmth. And though she never said it out loud, Elena knew the woman didn't want her there. Not because she didn't belong, but because she threatened something. Something old. Something buried. Even more confusing was Elena's growing pull toward Kale. Despite the circumstances of their marriage, despite the way he kept her in the dark, there were moments when his mask slipped, when he looked at her not with possession, but with something that resembled pain. Once, she found him in the garden at dawn, shirt sleeves rolled up, staring at an empty fountain. He didn't hear her approach, and when he finally noticed her, he looked startled, vulnerable, even. But as quickly as it came, the moment passed. His guard snapped back into place, and he told her to return to her quarters. But something in that silence told her everything she needed to know. He was hiding something, not from her, but for her. And then there was the matter of the missing chambermaid. Her name was Lyra. She'd been assigned to Elena the day she arrived. Young, sweet, nervous around the guards. She helped Elena dress, brought her meals, sometimes whispered rumors from the staff halls. Then, one evening, she vanished. The official word was that she'd returned to her village for family matters, but Elena found her uniform, perfectly folded, hidden in the laundry chute, and beneath the pocket flap, a small scrap of parchment that simply read, "He's not who you think he is." The longer Elena stayed in the palace, the more she questioned reality. What if Kale wasn't the villain? What if the marriage was the only way to shield her from something worse? What if Devon, the sweet co-worker who vanished, had known more than he let on? What if Serafina wasn't just a jealous courtier, but someone with deeper ties to Elena's bloodline? And what if Roger, her silent, distant stepfather, wasn't missing, but was hiding? None of it made sense yet. But the pieces were there, scattered like broken glass. And if Elena could just put them together, maybe she'd finally understand why Crown was placed on her head like a shackle, why love came wrapped in threats and secrets, and why the key Devon left behind fit one specific door in the east wing of the palace, a door that hadn't been opened in nearly 7 years. What was behind it? And more importantly, who didn't want her to find out? You'll want to stay with me, because the answers you're searching for are coming, but only if you're willing to follow Elena deeper into the palace, and into a truth no one's prepared to face. A palace, as grand and opulent as it appeared in photographs and press coverage, held shadows far deeper than its golden-laid ceilings and velvet-draped halls could ever reveal. Elena had spent the first few weeks adjusting to its strange rhythms, meals served at odd hours, security shift that changed inconsistently, and the eerie quiet that settled over the eastern wing at night like a hell breath. Every time she thought she was close to something, a clue, a name, a sliver of truth, something slipped from her grasp. She'd managed to hold onto the iron key Devon left her, keeping it hidden inside the hem of an old coat she rarely wore. But when she finally tried it on the locked door during one rain-soaked afternoon, the key no longer turned. The lock had been changed. Not only that, but the handle was cool to the touch, as if someone had just finished replacing it. Whoever they were, they knew she was coming. And then came the note, delivered not by palace staff, but tucked into the mirror frame in her bathroom. The handwriting was sharp, almost violent in its slant. Stop looking. You don't understand who's watching. There was no signature, no symbol, just those 7 words burning in her mind. Elena paced her chambers for hours, feeling the walls close and tighter with every passing second. Someone was trying to keep her from something important. And now, they weren't just hiding it. They were actively erasing it. 2 days later, she tried to confront Cale again, choosing a moment when the palace was unusually quiet and he seemed unguarded, standing by the window with a letter crushed in his hand. She started to speak, but he didn't even look at her. "You need to be careful," he said flatly. "Not everyone here wants to see you survive the year." She pressed him, demanded answers about Lyra, about the locked door, about why she was even brought into this marriage. He only shook his head. "It's not safe for you to know." The more she asked, the colder he became. But as she turned to leave, he added something in a voice so low it barely reached her. "Trust the wrong person once, and they'll make sure you never trust again." That night, Serafina appeared again, this time uninvited, standing inside Elena's chambers like she belonged there. Her dress shimmered in the candlelight, her expression unreadable. "You're stirring things that should stay buried," she said calmly, almost amused. "There are rules here, Elena, ancient ones. You were brought here to keep peace, not create chaos." Elena tried to challenge her, but Serafina's response was chilling. "Do you think the prince chose you?" Her smile was cruel, sad. "You weren't chosen. You were offered." Then she toned and left before Elena could ask what that meant. But it left a sour taste in her mouth, as if her entire role in this twisted fairy tale wasn't a miracle. It was a transaction. And then came the dream, or maybe it was a memory. She was younger, in her old apartment, curled up on the couch beside her mother. A storm rattled the windows. Her mother's voice, usually soft, was sharp with fear as she whispered a name Elena didn't recognize. Leontes. She said it with dread, said it like a warning. But when Elena asked who that was, her mother went silent. The next morning, her mother pretended it never happened. She wrote it off as a nightmare. But Elena remembered. She always had. After the dream, Elena tore through the small box of her mother's belongings she'd smuggled into the palace. Inside an old hardcover novel was a postcard, faded and yellowing, with a lion and rose emblem in the corner. The same seal from the summons. The postcard was unsigned, but scribbled in the margin were the words, "Protect her from the order." The back had a return address in Alizia. Everything she thought she knew about her life before the palace, her mother's death, Roger's silence, Devon's disappearance, was starting to unravel. And right as she felt on the brink of connecting the dots, her box of keepsakes vanished. Gone, as if it had never been there. The guards claimed they hadn't entered her chambers. Cale denied giving any orders. But when she checked the wardrobe where it had been hidden, she found something else, something far more disturbing. A single velvet glove, stitched with golden thread in the shape of a lion's head and a small bloodstain across the fingers. Someone had been there. Someone who knew her past better than she did. Someone who wanted her to keep doubting herself. Because if she ever stopped, if she ever truly started putting the truth together, she might find out something that couldn't be undone. And just when she resolved to fight harder, to uncover the palace's secrets no matter the cost, she received an invitation. A handwritten letter slipped under her door in the middle of the night. It was sealed with no crest, No mark, just a faint scent of sandalwood and lavender. The message was simple, but it shattered every assumption she had left. Devon is alive. Midnight. Chapel ruined beneath the west garden. Come alone. But here's the thing. There are no ruins listed on any palace map. And no one, not even the staff, speaks about what lies beneath the west garden. The letter burned in Elena's pocket like a live ember, the weight of its promise dragging through her every step as she crossed the marble corridors of the palace under the veil of midnight. The west garden was strictly off-limits, guarded by unspoken rules more than soldiers. Everyone knew not to question it. But someone was playing a dangerous game, and they were dragging her into it piece by piece. What disturbed her more than anything was the use of Devon's name. If he was alive, everything changed. The betrayal, the silence, the reason she was in this marriage. None of it made sense anymore. But if someone was lying, if someone was using his name as bait, then she wasn't just walking into a trap. She was walking into something much older, far more deliberate, and potentially fatal. But what Elena didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that halfway across the palace grounds, someone else had received an almost identical letter. Roger, the only person from her past who had followed her into this gilded prison, the one person she still believed might tell the truth, if he ever stopped pretending not to care. Roger had been working as a groundskeeper, silently observing the palace from the shadows, tracking movements, staff changes, even noting the strange nightly deliveries that came through the west gate without paperwork. He had long suspected this place was more than just a center of royal power. It was a nest of secrets, centuries deep. But that evening, when he returned to the small cottage assigned to him by the royal staff, he found his door ajar and a velvet envelope sitting on the kitchen table. It bore no address, no explanation. Inside was a single black and white photograph, Elena's mother, standing beside a man Roger had never seen before, both of them dressed in royal attire, their faces unreadable. The back of the photo was marked in the same scrawled handwriting that had haunted Elena's note. She knew. They always knew. Tell her nothing. The message was unmistakable. Someone was watching both of them. Someone who not only knew Elena's history, but also knew how to use it as leverage. For the first time, Roger hesitated. All this time, he'd kept his distance because he believed getting too close would endanger them both. But now, the warning was clear. Elena was already in danger. Maybe she had been since the beginning. And what made the whole thing spiral deeper into confusion was the presence of a third player, Lady Isla, the young royal cousin who always kept a polite distance, who never got involved, who smiled at all the right moments but never revealed where her true loyalties lay. She had recently been appointed to the palace's historical archive, a boring title, but one that gave her access to centuries of royal family secrets. That very same night, she found one of the archive drawers ajar, a file missing. When she followed the trace of missing parchment and wax seals, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. Elena's birth certificate had been tampered with. The name of her father, previously listed as unknown, had been replaced with a sealed stamp from the Royal Records Office. Not a signature, just a symbol. The lion and the rose. The seal of the crown. Lady Isla stared at the document, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. If the crown had altered Elena's file, if the royal family had been involved in her life long before her marriage to Kale, then Elena wasn't just an outsider force into this world. She was part of it, bred into it, maybe even born into it. Isla didn't know what to do with the information. She debated burning it, hiding it, pretending she had never seen it, but some part of her knew that was impossible now. She had become entangled in the web, whether she wanted to be or not. That same night, when she returned to her private quarters, she found a note on her vanity in that same violent scrawl. You were warned. Suddenly, everyone was connected. Everyone had been touched by this unknown force, this shadowed puppeteer twisting strings in the dark. Elena, unknowingly tied to a bloodline she had been taught to hate. Roger, trying to protect her from a truth he never fully understood. Isla, caught between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to what was right. And at the center of it all, Kale, whose coldness was starting to look more like fear than arrogance, like a man trying desperately to protect something even he didn't fully understand. But just as the thread started to pull tighter, just when Elena thought she might finally get close to the truth, everything began to unravel. She followed the path to the ruins beneath the West Garden, carefully, silently, alone, only to find the entrance sealed shut. No light, no opening, just ivy-covered stone and silence. It wasn't a meeting point, it was a tomb, or maybe a warning. And when she turned back toward the path, she saw something that made her legs lock in place. A figure was watching her from the trees, not moving, not speaking, just watching. The same way they had watched her at the masquerade. The same way someone had been watching her in the hall of portraits. When she called out, they vanished into the shadows. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came when she returned to her chambers, shaken and breathless, and found a new item waiting for her on the bed. Devon's locket. The locket was warm in her palm, as if it had been held moments before, its once rusted hinge now polished to a gleaming gold that caught the flickering candlelight. Elena didn't want to open it. Every part of her resisted. Every instinct warned her that whatever was inside would change things forever. But the silence in the room was suffocating, and so was the weight of not knowing. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she pried it open. Inside was not a picture, not a lock of hair, not even a name. It was a single slip of paper, creased, aged, and stained with something too dark to be ink. The words were few, but the meaning sliced through her like glass. You were never meant to survive this. Run. A chill crawled down her spine, not from the draft that crept through the palace walls, but from something far colder, an ancient, calculated malice that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface. The locket was no accident. It was a message, a threat, a final warning. And for the first time since this whole charade of a marriage began, Elena understood that her presence in the palace wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. She barely slept that night. Her heartbeat echoed against the silence, keeping time with every creak of the old stone and groan of the wind against the windows. She watched shadows shift across the floor, convinced more than once that someone was standing just beyond the edge of candlelight. By morning, the world outside her chamber felt heavier, too quiet, like the air before a storm. Her usual breakfast tray didn't arrive. The maid who typically brought it, Saria, the only staff member who dared speak to Elena without flinching, was nowhere to be found. Elena waited, then ventured out, checking the hallway, the kitchen wing, even the service quarters. But Saria had vanished without explanation. When she asked, the other servants only exchanged glances and said she had taken a sudden leave. But Elena had seen Saria's face the night before, pale, anxious, avoiding her gaze. Something had scared her, and that's when it began. The following, subtle at first, footsteps behind her that stopped when she turned, a shimmer of movement in the reflection of a mirror. Twice she caught the faint smell of her mother's perfume, lavender and ash, despite the fact that her mother had been dead for over a decade. Every time she looked over her shoulder, there was nothing, no proof, just a sensation, the icy certainty that she wasn't alone. Worse still, Roger had disappeared. She checked his quarters, then the edge of the grounds, then the gardens. No sign. A broken watch lay at the base of the east tower wall, shattered glass face gleaming in the morning sun. It was the same watch he had worn every day since she arrived. Elena pocketed it, her mind racing through memories, trying to convince herself it didn't mean what she feared. But fear was no longer a whisper. It was a scream in the back of her skull. The palace suddenly felt like a labyrinth designed to confuse and trap. Doors that used to open were locked. Corridors were blocked off with maintenance signs that hadn't been there the day before. Kale, when she tried to speak to him, was colder than ever, eyes sharp, voice clipped, brushing off her concerns as hysteria. But his right hand trembled slightly when he reached for a goblet at dinner. He was scared too. He just didn't want her to see it. And then the message came. It wasn't written or whispered. It was carved. Across the mirror in her private bathroom, etched deep into the glass by something sharp and unforgiving. Bloodlines don't lie. You have his eyes. Elena stared at the words, horror pooling in her stomach, her reflection fractured by each jagged letter. Someone had been in her room, not just lurking outside or watching from a distance. Inside, close enough to touch her things, to know her history, to echo the very accusation that had haunted her for years. Her eyes, the same pale gray as her mother's. And now she couldn't shake the possibility that the mystery of her parentage, the real reason she had been forced into this marriage, was tied to something far more sinister than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about politics or bloodlines. It was about erasure, about silence, about someone powerful enough to rewrite history and ruthless enough to eliminate anyone who questioned it. The palace, once gilded and awe-inspiring, now felt like a prison carved from secrets and designed to swallow her whole. She didn't know who to trust, if anyone was left to trust at all. The faces around her blurred into masks. Lady Isla had gone quiet, avoiding her gaze. The head steward no longer looked her in the eye. And Cale was beginning to look like a man who had lost control of the machine he was trying to protect. Always. Maybe he'd never had control at all. As night fell again, the candlelight flickered violently, and the mirror shattered without warning, slicing cleanly through the air as if something unseen had punched through it from the other side. Elena dropped to the floor, heart hammering in her chest, blood buzzing in her ears. Her world was no longer just shifting, it was collapsing. And outside her chamber door, just past the splinters of broken glass, a shadow moved. Slow. Silent. ChatGPT said. It happened in the quietest moment, when Elena had finally sunk into the velvet chair by the fire, exhausted, her nerves frayed and spirit bruised. For once, there were no footsteps behind her, no breath in the back of her neck, no shadows darting along the edge of her vision, just silence and flame. And then the envelope fell through the door. No knock, no footsteps, just a soft, sliding sound that made her heart stop. She stared at it, a plain ivory square with no name, no seal, no sign of origin. But something about it felt familiar. Too familiar. She picked it up with shaking hands, slid her finger under the flap, and unfolded a single sheet of thick paper. The handwriting was bold and meticulous, looping with authority. The message was short. You're looking in the wrong place. The prince didn't trap you. He tried to save you. Ask about the woman in the portrait. West Wing. Midnight. It hit her like a slap. Everything she had believed up until that moment. That Cale had orchestrated her imprisonment, that the palace had swallowed her whole because of some cruel dynastic arrangement, suddenly teetered on the edge of collapse. Could she have been wrong? Could the coldness in his voice, the distance in his eyes, the locked doors and vanished staff, be symptoms of something else? Of fear, perhaps? Of protection? She didn't want to believe it, but she couldn't ignore the message. Whoever sent it knew things only someone on the inside would know. Her pulse racing, Elena waited. Midnight came slowly, every tick of the antique clock sounding louder than the last. At exactly 12, she slipped through the halls like a ghost, her steps muffled in a runner, heart pounding louder than her breath. The West Wing had been sealed off for weeks under the pretense of restoration, but the door creaked open with a simple push. Dust hung heavy in the air. The scent of age and wood polish clung to the velvet curtains, and the portraits that lined the walls stared down at her like sentinels. But it was the final painting at the end of the corridor that stopped her dead. It was her, or rather, someone who looked just like her. The same silver eyes, the same heart-shaped face, the same birthmark on the left collarbone. But the woman in the painting wore royal jewels, her head high, posture regal. The placard beneath read, Queen Seraphine, 22, presumed dead 19 years ago. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Her mother's name was Sarah. She had always told Elena they lived simply, had no connections, no past worth discussing. But now the timeline's twisted. 19 years ago, Elena would have been just a baby. Suddenly, everything made a brutal kind of sense. The palace wasn't protecting Cale's title. It was hiding the truth about Seraphine, about her supposed death, about a child that vanished with her. Elena wasn't just a political pawn forced into a marriage to consolidate power. She was the rightful heir, a missing royal, born of blood and secrets, hidden away in the countryside by a mother who'd faked her own death to protect her. The marriage had been arranged not to trap her, but to bring her home. Behind her, a slow clap echoed through the hallway. Elena turned, every muscle locked in panic. Lord Evander stood in the shadows, his smile a slow, deliberate curl of amusement. "It took you long enough," he said softly, his voice more venomous than ever. "You look just like her. You know, that was always a problem." She stepped back instinctively, trying to make sense of his presence here, now, in this wing. "What do you mean?" she asked, though a part of her already knew. Evander tilted his head. stepping closer with the ease of someone who'd spent years walking these halls in secrecy. Seraphine was my sister, and I would have inherited everything if she'd just stayed dead. He said it without blinking. But she ran. She ruined everything. And now you brought her back. In your face. In your blood. In your voice when you speak her name. The ground beneath Elena seemed to tilt. Evander had never just been a servant of the court or a distant advisor to the royal family. He had been waiting, watching, keeping the past buried long enough to position himself close to the throne, just close enough to strike when it mattered. "But Cale," she whispered, barely able to speak. He knew. Evander smirked. He knew, and he disobeyed every order to turn you in. He lied to protect you, risked exile, even death. That's why I had to push the wedding, before he could tell you the truth, before you figured out who you really are. The truth ripped through her like a blade. Cale had known from the beginning, and instead of using her like a pawn, he had tried, however coldly, however silently, to shield her from the legacy waiting to devour her. But that shield was crumbling. And now, with Evander standing before her, the real game had begun. A gust of wind blew through the hallway, snuffing out the candelabras one by one, casting long shadows across Queen Seraphine's portrait. Evander's smile faded. "We're far past secrets now, niece," he murmured, stepping back into the darkness. "Let's see if you inherited your mother's spine, or her grave." And then he was gone. Elena stood alone in the hallway, her breath ragged, her hands shaking, not from fear, but from the terrible weight of awakening. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. Every step forward was now into a maze of power, betrayal, and blood. But one truth remained. Cale hadn't forced her into marriage to imprison her. He had done it to keep her alive. And now, with everything exposed, Elena wasn't just in danger. She was a danger. The storm that had been looming over the palace finally broke the night Elena decided to confront Evander. Thunder cracked over the darkened rooftops like a warning, and the windows rattled in their ancient frames. She wore black, not for mourning, but for war. Every corridor she passed felt haunted. Every oil painting and marble bust a witness to a history soaked in betrayal. But she wasn't that frightened girl who had stumbled into an unwanted marriage, lost in silken secrets. She was Seraphine's daughter, a queen's legacy, and she was walking toward a truth that had tried too long to stay buried. The West Tower, sealed for years under the guise of renovations, was where Evander kept his private study, a sanctum of twisted power and unanswered questions. Tonight, it would give her what she needed, or it would destroy her. She slipped inside just as lightning lit up the sky. The room was cold, lined with shelves and dusty scrolls. A single candle burned on the massive desk where Evander sat, calm, unmoved, like he'd been expecting her. "So," he said without looking up, his voice slow and poisonous, "you finally stopped running." She stepped forward, heart pounding but face unreadable. "I'm not the one who's been hiding behind portraits and shadows." He looked up then, his eyes glittering. "You know, I almost admired Seraphine for disappearing the way she did. Took courage to fake her death, to vanish with a child, but it was cowardice too. She left a war for you to inherit." Elena didn't blink. "You created the war. You made her disappear. She chose exile." Evander hissed, finally rising from his chair. She had no right to the crown. The council never accepted her bloodline, and certainly not the child of a foreign commoner. "I spent 2 decades fixing the mess you left behind, building alliances, sealing borders, keeping this country from tearing itself apart, and you just walk in and undo it all." "No," Elena said, voice steady, eyes sharp. "I walked in and found the truth. You poisoned her. You tried to kill her. You just didn't count on her surviving long enough to hide me." Evander smiled again, but this time there was no charm. "And who told you that?" he said, circling the desk like a predator. "Cale? That fool barely understands what he risked. I gave him everything, his title, his lands, his seat at the table, and he gave it all up for you, for some girl he thought he could save." Elena clenched her fists. "You tried to make me doubt him. You made me think he was part of this, part of the trap." Evander scoffed. He was. He just didn't realize the cage was locked from the inside. She moved closer to the desk, hands trembling, but not with fear, with fury. She'd spent weeks unraveling every document, every secret corridor, every hidden diary from her mother's past. And the final piece had come hours earlier, delivered not by Cale or a loyal courtier, but by the palace archivist, an old woman with shaking hands and tear-filled eyes. It was a letter written by Queen Seraphine in her own hand, dated just days before her disappearance. It named Evander. It detailed everything. His attempt to overthrow her, the forged documents, the secret meeting where he tried to sell her crown to foreign dignitaries. And it named her daughter, Elena, as heir to the throne in case anything ever happened to her. Elena placed the letter on the desk between them. "Your time is over." Evander stared at it for a long moment before laughing. "Do you really think a scrap of paper and your mother's ghosts are going to save you?" "No," came a voice from the doorway. "But the council might." Cale stepped into the room, soaked from the storm, his sword drawn, not in violence, but as symbol. Behind him, 4 members of the royal council entered, grim and silent, followed by armed guards. Elena turned slowly, breath caught in her throat. She hadn't asked Cale to come. She hadn't even known if he would. But the look in his eyes, fierce, protective, unforgiving, told her everything she needed to know. Evander went pale. "You set this up," he whispered, his voice unraveling. "No," Cale said. "You did. Years ago, when you tried to silence a queen and bury her child. You set it in motion the day you chose your own power over your family." The guard stepped forward. Evander tried to run. Of course he did. But the West Wing no longer belonged to him. He was seized within seconds, dragged from the study screaming curses about bloodlines and legacies and rightful rule. Elena didn't flinch. She stood taller than she ever had, her fingers still resting on her mother's final letter. But just as the storm began to quiet, just as it felt like the palace could finally exhale, Cale stepped closer to her and said something that made her blood run cold. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "That night you arrived, your room wasn't assigned by accident. Someone else had been staying there. Someone the council believed was the heir." Elena's breath caught. Cale looked into her eyes, no longer with certainty but with a shadow of doubt. There was another child. Evander never mentioned it. But someone else claims the same birthright. And now they vanished. The walls that had just been rebuilt in her mind shattered all over again. A second heir. Another secret. Another ghost in the halls. The mystery wasn't over. The morning light bled softly through the high arched windows of the palace, casting golden warmth across the ancient stone floors that had so long echoed with secrets. For the first time in weeks, the air felt breathable, free of a weight that had cloaked it since Elena arrived. Outside, the capital was stirring with hesitant celebration. Bells tolled not in mourning but in renewal. Yet inside the quiet stillness of the throne room, Elena stood alone, her thoughts echoing louder than any chime or voice. The velvet throne she now had the right to claim felt less like a prize and more like a burden carved in marble. Everything had changed, yet something in her heart whispered that the deeper mystery remained untouched. Evander had been taken to the eastern prison that morning, where he would be tried by the full council, and though the charges were overwhelming, it was a truth he couldn't escape, not anymore. His manipulations, his betrayal, the silencing of her mother, the hidden child, it had all unraveled because Elena had chosen to dig where others dared not look. But in doing so, she had become someone entirely different from the girl who once begged to go home. Cale entered the room quietly, not in his usual armor, but in simple robes that reminded her of the man he was before the palace turned him into a weapon. Their eyes met, and neither of them spoke at first. So much had passed between them. Distrust, alliance, guarded affection, and yet the bond now felt undeniable. He walked to her side and placed something in her hand without a word. It was a silver pendant, old and worn, etched with a royal crest that wasn't his. The moment she touched it, she knew it belonged to the other child, the one the council once mistook for Seraphine's heir. The pendant had been found in the underground tunnels beneath the servants' wing, wrapped in torn fabric, buried near what used to be the palace's hidden nacery. No body, no letters, just silence. But that single pendant raised questions that refused to fade, even with justice finally served. Elena clenched it tightly in her palm, her heart aching for answers she might never get. Who was the other heir? A decoy used to protect her? A sibling her mother never spoke of? Or a fabrication created by the council to seize power if Seraphine's plan failed? Cale admitted the council was divided on the truth. Some still believed Elena was the rightful heir. Others now feared that their blind loyalty had made them pawns in something far more calculated than even Evander's schemes. The uncertainty was a shadow that even victory couldn't dispel, and as Elena looked out over the capital, she realized she would forever carry the weight of not knowing. But peace isn't always found in perfect answers. Sometimes it's found in choosing not to be ruled by the unknown. Elena took the throne days later, not in a lavish ceremony, but in a quiet gathering of council members, citizens, and royal guards who had witnessed the truth unfold. She swore an oath not to reign with fear, but with clarity, and vowed to reopen the archives, to reveal every hidden document, and to rewrite the kingdom's history not as it was told, but as it was lived. She refused to erase the pain of the betrayal, because that pain had shaped who she'd become. She gave Cale a place at her side, not as a consort, not as a prince, but as an equal, her chosen shield, and the only man who never asked her to become someone else. And though whispers still followed them through palace halls and open courts, they no longer stung. They were reminders of how far they had come. On the night of her first festival as queen, Elena returned to the West Tower. Alone, she stood beneath the stars, holding the pendant, and for a moment imagined a child, laughing, running through corridors now quiet with time. Whether that child ever truly existed or was just another lie buried to protect her didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd survived it all, and in doing so, had become the ruler the kingdom didn't expect but desperately needed. And as she stood beneath the vast open sky, the wind shifted through the trees, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a whisper of something still waiting to be found. The story had ended. Yes, but the truth? The truth still had corners to reveal. And so the kingdom exhaled, and Elena, once a pawn in a marriage she never wanted, now held the power not just to rule, but to remember, to question, and to never, ever forget. Because some thrones are built on blood,